You've tuned in to Phyla and Fandom, a podcast on the Nerd Sloth Network. Today's episode is all about introductions, not only introducing ourselves, but also introducing our podcast and explaining why we find it so important to educate others about the animal kingdom and the furry fandom.
You can't teach me anything, I got a brick between the ears. I don't have time to wonder why the seasons chase the years. Water's wet, my eyes are dry, and that wind it tends to blow. Well, I'm too old to learn, cause there ain't nothing left to know.
You're listening to Phyla and Fandom, a podcast on the Nerd Sloth Network ran by two furry scientists, myself, Dr. Wildlife,
and me, Nassie.
Each week we'll be exploring the world around us by discussing current topics in our own scientific fields, as well as current happenings in fandom-based subcultures like the furry fandom.
Today's date is January 23rd, 2019, and this will be episode 1.
So I think the first thing that we need to address with this is what the heck is Phyla? Because obviously, being two scientists that work with animals and critters of some kind, we see it quite often, but I don't know how many of our listeners are probably familiar with it.
Yeah.
Would you like to cover it?
Sure, I can cover it. Phyla is the taxonomic diversity or the diversity of life that exists on the planet and how that diversity relates to one another across the planet. So we all come from a common ancestor, or at least that's the current theory in biology, is we all originate from a common ancestor. And Phyla is the diversity of life that exists on the planet. So we all exist from a common ancestor, and as we evolved and grew in the history of the planet, we branched out and became different species. And so Phyla is how we describe the relatedness between each of those species across the planet.
Exactly. And what's kind of fun about choosing Phyla is it still encompasses both of our fields of work. It's not just exclusive to vertebrates, which is primarily what I study. It's not exclusive to just your world of insects. It encompasses both of our fields of work and much more. So I think Phyla is like a really good way of getting our biology nerdiness into the name of this podcast, honestly.
Yeah. And it kind of includes like diversity in general. And there's a lot of diversity that exists within the furry fandom.
Exactly. And I think just as a brief comment, I just mentioned that Phyla covers both of our worlds, but maybe we should specifically mention what Phyla we study. I mean, Arthropoda is kind of your whole little world, I would say.
Yeah.
So, and then of course, I'm kind of scattered, I guess. I say that I said it like there was two different Phyla that we could focus on, but being a manager of an aquarium, I think I encounter a lot of different things from mollusca to circumstations, which is kind of branching into your world. But I guess on a daily or career focused scale, I would say I'm mainly in chordata or specifically vertebrata, since most of everything I study has a backbone of some kind.
Very different from mine, where none of it has a backbone.
Right? So we're very similar in what we do, but we're also quite different at the same time.
Yeah, biologists kind of end up being jack of all trades, where they get questions about all kinds of different species and across different groups, and we get training in all of it, but we get very specialized when we start to find out our passions.
Exactly. And I think, speaking of passions, it kind of leads to something I wanted to cover in this first episode, and it's a common question I've been getting when I've been hinting that we're going to be doing this. And it's why did we want to make a podcast? I think for me personally, a podcast is just a neat way for me to come together with another furry scientist like yourself and just have general chit-chat conversations. I've always had, people interested in like small talk with me about my career field, and I think a podcast is like a good solution to that. And also it allows you to connect to your followers. I would think so anyway.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's something that I've wanted to do for quite a while, actually. Like, either, I don't know, I've had ideas for all kinds of different formats from like board games and biology to like including furry things. And I've been on a few podcasts, but it's nice to have kind of a place to talk about two of our passions and something that I think a lot of furries are interested in, at least judging from our followings and our fan base.
Yeah, and I think even outside of the furry fandom, I know the folks at Nerdsloth Network were pretty excited about the idea. They're going to hate me when they're actually listening to this in real time, but Joseph and Christopher, they've been really awesome in actually getting this running, and to the point, neither of them are furries, but this may be the year that Joseph finds his fursona after making the connection with us. And that's crazy cool, which fursona, what's that for all you non-furry listeners? We'll get into that eventually. That is like foreshadowing of things to come, basically.
Yeah. Don't want to scare you off too soon.
Maybe I shouldn't drop the F word so soon into this.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, before we get too much into the furry world, I think the next thing we should cover is that intro where I said we're two furry scientists. And I'm sure there's someone out there that's picturing us like people, we're just like these really hairy people that say
really hairy people that are just talking about science.
We're basically bears.
Yeah.
Like, in terms of like hair all over our bodies.
Yeah.
No, not at all. Oh gosh. So I mean, that's kind of it's an easy question, but it's also a tough one. It's like, what's the easiest way to describe why I call this furry scientist?
I think the easiest way to address it is just like we're people that have a passion for science and biology specifically, but we're also people that have the hobby of anthropomorphic characters. So we just enjoy dressing up as fuzzy critters and enjoying the creative side of that.
Exactly. And I think the important thing to mention is that furries are people.
Yeah, exactly.
I think a lot of people forget that. They picture that a lot of furries are just, these people that just exist at fur cons. And what they do outside of fur cons is like this great mystery. But the truth is, furries are just like anybody else in the world. I mean, we're scientists, obviously, but there's engineers and teachers and police officers, firefighters, music producers. I think the biggest thing that shocks people when I'm talking to them about the fandom is just how likely it is that any everyday person you interact with is actually a member of the furry fandom.
Yeah, or at least has some interest in it, right?
Yeah, we blend in so well. It's really kind of frightening.
Yeah, and I think that's something that touches on a whole phyla thing, like the diversity not only exists in species, but within our own species and within furry. Like, there's just so many people. And like, I know for one, I wouldn't have met so many diverse professions if I wasn't in the furry fandom, which I think is really cool.
And kind of speaking of professions, what is it that you exactly do? I mean, I know, but I don't know how many of our listeners know. We keep saying we're scientists, but what do you specifically work on?
So I am an entomologist, or more specifically, a myrmecologist. I work on insects and ants, and I'm a PhD student and lecturer at the University of Guelph.
That's awesome. And I'm sure for those of you listening that have seen me talk about teaching before, you know that I actually used to teach at a university too. I don't anymore because now my full-time job is managing an aquarium. So I went from teaching to managing, which has been pretty awesome. But outside of that, I also conduct research, except my research is with bigger and fuzzier things with
charismatic megafauna.
Yes, charismatic megafauna. I heard that word a lot as an undergrad since my lab was, they were all fish people. And there was me studying tigers in a world of fish. So, yeah, I mean, I manage an aquarium, but I also do research with tigers, other big cats too, but more specifically tigers, which is pretty cool. I think it is.
Yeah.
Your creatures are cool too. I mean, they're not. People may not lump them in charismatic megafauna, but some of them are pretty charismatic, I would say.
I would say so as well.
So, what exactly got you into that? I mean, I've met so many different people with so many different stories on how they got involved in animal science or just animal-related careers in general, and I think everybody's path is just so unique. And I'm definitely interested in hearing how you got into it.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of like where the bulk of the episode kind of will come into play. It's an amazing journey to talk about for both of us, I'm sure. Like, it's something that I hear on Twitter all the time too, about people talking about their passion in their fields and how they got started. For me, it was a lifelong thing. Like, when I was really little, I grew up in a trailer and I didn't really have access to much electricity, let alone like TV or games or anything like that. So my dad and my mom, we would always go outside and play in nature a lot. And I would always be outside looking at the little things. I spent a lot of time close to the ground looking at like ants' nests and collecting caterpillars and watching them metamorphosize into butterflies and that kind of thing. And I even have journals from as young as 2 years old where I would try and draw little caterpillars. It's just like kind of a green line across a paper or something like that. But yeah. And just making notes about what I saw and that kind of thing, discovering the world. And as I grew up, my parents fueled that passion. My dad originally went to school for marine biology, so we had all these marine biology texts and that kind of thing. And I started with those, but then with my passion growing in entomology, I got more books about insects and I learned all that I could. I kind of got known in grade school as the bug kid. And everybody like called me that, and anytime there was a question about an insect on the playground, the kid would come up with it in their hands and ask me about it. And then I kept pursuing that. And in high school, everything kind of changed for the next stage of things when my biology teacher saw my journal that I would write about insects and that kind of thing. And he was like, I know the curator at the museum. Do you want a job there or potentially like meet the curator there? And so he set up the meeting for me. We went there and the curator instantly was like, do you want to be a summer student? Do you want to start participating in field research? And this is like in grade 9 of high school. And I was like, oh, hell yeah.
That's so awesome.
Yeah. And then from there, it just kept going. Like, I went away to university. I found out the best school for entomology near me, and that was the University of Guelph. Moved away there and then did my undergrad, got more training in taxonomy of ants while I was doing that. Did my master's at the University of Guelph and now doing my PhD at the University of Guelph.
That almost kind of sounds like my exact story, but more fluffy things and less buggy things.
Yeah.
I grew up down a dirt road in Arkansas. I also grew up in a trailer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I know. And I'm like, as I'm listening to your story, I'm like, are you me?
Wow.
Yeah.
It was destiny.
Right. So I grew up in the middle of nowhere. My family owned a really nice farm, which was about like 80 acres or so, maybe 100 if you combine like all the plots of land, because it was kind of scattered across this dirt road that we lived down. And my idea of fun after school was driving either out with the animals, with all the farm animals, or like driving our three-wheeler around. And I say three-wheeler because it's very different than what people think of an ATV, which has 4 wheels. Mm-hmm. This was like an old school 1960s era Honda 3-wheeler. Very dangerous machine, actually, because they roll over so easily since they're so high powered. Not that I'm speaking from experience or anything, but, totally not. 3 wheels is not very stable, especially when you're going really fast up and down hills in the middle of nowhere. Let's just say that. But it wasn't all just about riding that around and going fast, but I would take it into our woods, the forest that surrounded our land and was a part of our land. And I would spend time out there just like looking for birds, looking for other creatures. Oddly enough, when I was a child, I ran across a mountain lion, which I say mountain lion, and other people are probably calling it a puma or a cougar or a panther, same creature, the tan North American big cat. I actually ran across one on our property, and like we looked at each other, and I think we were both terrified. And it went one way and I went the other way, because we were just like, no, this is like, neither of us want to deal with that.
No, none of you want a tango.
Right? So, I mean, I grew up with farm animals and was always working around our vet when he would make visits out for our cattle or the horses or anything. And as I got older in the high school and I was old enough, I started actually volunteering with the vet clinic. So in addition to like standard animal care, I was also kind of getting involved with the medical side of things. And of course, now that I'm saying all this, everybody's probably realizing, well, it makes sense that she would want to go into vet school. And that's actually the path that I went on at first. I went into undergrad at the University of Central Arkansas for a biology degree, but my focus was pre-vet. And for years, I was focused on becoming a zoo veterinarian and, caring for animals at like the San Diego Zoo. That was like the ultimate goal, is being like the head veterinarian at the San Diego Zoo. And so I started doing all these internships at various zoos, trying to get different experience with different groups of animals, because obviously vet school is incredibly competitive in the United States. I mean, even worse so than med school. So you have to make yourself stand out. And the way that I wanted to do that was getting internships with just various different types of animals, from elephants to penguins and everything in between. Mm-hmm. And along that journey, I eventually ended up at the National Tiger Sanctuary working with big cats, because it was kind of like big cats were the final piece of the puzzle in my journey to making a varied resume for my vet school application. And this is where I decided I didn't want to go to vet school anymore. So I went through all of this, and everything led to me at this big cat sanctuary. And one day we got a tiger in that was making these strange noises that we had actually never heard any of the other tigers make. And to clarify, these are tigers that are like rescues or rehomes from other facilities, not wild tigers. They're kind of, I don't want to call them hand-me-down tigers, but we often say that because they may have been passed from several different owners of facilities before they ended up with us. And I met this tiger named Tina, and Tina was making these strange noises. They were very entertaining. And one day over lunch, we joked around saying that we should record Tina's voice and market it as tiger songs. And tiger songs would be what saves tigers, just like whale songs help save whales. And it was like this hilarious thing, because who's going to buy a CD and listen to tigers like meowing? I mean, I say that, but there's probably a ton of people listening right now that are like, I would buy it. But I mean, the general public, how many people are going to want to drive in their car listening to tigers like growling at each other? It's not. It was just a big joke. But that silly conversation ended up turning into an undergrad research project, which ended up turning into my master's project, which ended up turning into my PhD project, all because what we were listening to, we eventually found out was a tiger's individual vocal fingerprint, and that they actually have voices as unique as our own. You can tell individuals apart from it. And of course, that discovery is what led me to realize that I could be of more use doing conservation research than I would vet med.
Right.
I would probably have still been happy with vet med, but I am so happy that I met that tiger, and it led me to that situation, because I mean, who knows? I may not have been doing this podcast if I went the other direction, because it's my research that led me to meeting you. in this whole podcast becoming a thing.
Yeah, exactly. Now you're pretending to be a tiger.
Right now I dress up as one.
Yeah.
You never know where your life's going to take you. You start out on a dirt road and you end up a furry. I mean,
Yeah. You end up flipping over on a 3-wheeler.
It's all that brain damage, as I say, brain damage that I got from flipping it over.
Maybe for me it's one too many stings.
Oh no, maybe that's what happens. This is like becoming a furry is like the terrible version of becoming a superhero.
Yeah.
It's like you bit by the radioactive spider, but instead you become furry trash.
Yeah. You just one day come out of the garbage can. Oh, I am now a furry.
You're wearing a tail in a wooing.
Yeah. I guess that leads us to the next topic, which is how we became furries.
Oh yeah, I mean, I got bit by a radioactive tiger, and we just went from there.
Yeah, I was pulling ticks off of a deer, and then the deer bit me, and I was like, I'm a deer now.
Yeah, instead of rabies, you got furriness. Furries.
Yeah.
Yes, furries, if you will. So I don't know if I've ever told you, but the way I became a furry is kind of hilarious because I'm kind of a late bloomer, so to speak, for the fandom. I didn't get involved until I'm 28 now, and I'm trying to think of how old I was now. So almost 2 years ago. So I was just about to turn 27. So I was about 26 at the time, and I'm terrible at math. It's been a long day, so hopefully no one's judging me right now. But I was 26 years old, and I've always been interested in cosplay and doing charity work with costumes. And I've had a Spider-Gwen, I've had an Iron Woman, but something just made me really want to have a Rocket Raccoon costume. But I was just like, how the heck am I going to make this? And then one of my friends, who isn't a furry, but is very involved with like anime conventions and other conventions that furries often frequent, he was like, you should look for a fursuit commission person. And I'm like, what does that mean? What's a fursuit commission?
Yeah.
And so, I start Googling, and that's what happens. I think that's the beginning, the origin story of a lot of furries.
I think that's everybody.
Yeah. And so I finally found a fursuit maker for my Rocket Raccoon suit. It was Geek Paw Productions, and got things set up, got it paid. I actually paid it completely in full because I was so excited. And this was before I decided I wanted 14 million suits. I was like, oh yeah, I'll just pay it all at once. But I was getting it made, and that same friend, who is my best friend, Alex, is like, what's going to happen now, right? And I asked him what. He's like, you're going to become the furry queen. And I'm like, what does the furry queen mean? And he's like, all it takes is like a few Google searches and one commission, and you can't go back.
Yeah.
And the next thing I know, a month after commissioning the fursuit, I made my first fur meet.
What? That's crazy.
And, I made a fur meet, and then I started helping with other fur meets. And then a few months later, I was staff for Furry Fiesta. And then a few months after that, I was executive staff for Furry Fiesta.
Holy crap, you just went headlong into it. Jeez.
Occasionally I get texts from Alex, and he's just like, he's not mocking me, but he's like, told you kind of thing. And he loves it. He thinks it's hilarious. Like, he'll start crying from laughter because he saw this in a prophecy that this was all going to happen. Yeah. And I didn't believe it. But now look at me. I'm on a podcast.
I mean, that's amazing to me. I can't believe that you just went headlong, and it's like, oh yeah, I really like furry now. I'm gonna like get them all together.
I know, right?
That's so cool. Wow.
Well, I mean, I didn't like it. The fur meet thing happened because I started joining all the Telegram chats in the DFW area, and they started talking about existing meets. And I think I posed the question. I was like, "Do we have arcade meet?" And they're like, "No." And I was like, "Oh, that would be cool." And then, next thing I know.
I'm doing it regularly.
Happened.
Yeah.
So did you kind of like wake up one day and you were a furry, or was it like a slow progression into it?
So mine was a very slow progression. Like that is funny because comparing how similarly we became like biologists and like our upbringings, like my furry introduction was way different. So like I when I moved away to the University of Guelph to start my studies, it like the University of Guelph is about 2,000 kilometers away from my home. Like I grew up in St. John, New Brunswick, which is about half the country away. And I didn't know anybody. Like I just decided to go on a whim, but all of my family and all of my friends, they're all in New Brunswick. I mean, not anymore. I have a lot of friends around here now, but yeah, I didn't know anybody when I moved away. So for the first 3 weeks, and I was super socially awkward, like socially anxious and socially awkward. For the first 3 weeks, I didn't want to leave my room. And so I was living in residence on the university campus. And so I was on a floor with a bunch of other people and we had a communal washroom. And I would like stay in my room until like 5 a.m, go and have my shower when I knew nobody was going to be up, and then leave for my classes that early. So I would get into the classroom at like 6 a.m. It starts at 8. And then I would come home at like 11 when most of them were going to be in their rooms or asleep. That's just like, that's how bad of like, no, and it was not like I was that like weird or anything. I mean, I study insects, so I'm a little weird, but I wasn't that weird or anything like that, but it's just like, it was so tough for me. And so one of the ways I started to try and reach out and connect with people was I looked for online communities of people that liked animals and insects and biology. And so I literally was searching on an insect forum, and somebody had posted a picture of I believe it was a beetle at the time, a beetle or a caterpillar, and they were doing their project on insects, and I identified it for them. But in the description of the picture, there was a link to their for affinity page where they also had the picture. And so I followed the link and I went onto the website and I was like, oh, this is really kind of cool. Like there's a community of people that love animals and some love insects, and they like to pretend they're an animal or an insect. And so I just like kind of fell down that rabbit hole. And of course, when I have so much time and I'm on my own in my dorm room for like 3 weeks, I dove down that quite deep. I made my own for affinity page and connected with people, messaged people like, what is this thing? Like, what have I gotten myself into? And I just kept like kind of going down that hole. I found out there was a few forums of people that were local. And so I messaged the local people. And like there was a couple of furries that were on campus and I met with them one-on-one. And for some reason I found that easier. I think it was because like I connected with them over like that shared interest of animals. And I was like, oh, I can meet this person one-on-one like a lot easier than I could even my floor mates. But that moment of being able to go out and do that kind of thing kind of broke me out of my shell. And I started to like do little events with the people on my floor. I got to know them really well. Like I started to do more university and campus events and that kind of thing. And it turned out that the person that I originally messaged that I identified the like caterpillar or beetle for was doing their research in Hamilton. And so I got to know them better, and they said, oh, maybe I can come to Guelph sometime and we can play board games or something like that. They came and we played board games, and then a couple of months later, I started dating them, and now they're my husband.
Oh, gosh, the origin story.
Yeah, I know. And it's crazy because it's like the first person I messaged in the fandom ended up inevitably becoming my husband, which is like mind-blowing. But yeah, and that was back in 2010 when I first went away to university. And really, though, I enjoyed doing the one-on-one interactions. And I think this is why your startup going like straight into the meets was like totally out there for me because I did the one-on-one interactions a lot, but I could not do the like social meets and that kind of thing. I didn't even know what a con was at that time. I was actually terrified of fursuits. Like I know like when I was little, I would go to Disneyland and not be able to get pictures with like the mascots and stuff. Like I just hated them. And I couldn't picture wanting to like be in a costume. And so it took me 3 years before I went to my first local meet, and that was horrible.
Oh no.
Yeah, it was just like, it was a really bad meet. It was big and there was like cliques of people and didn't really connect with anybody at it. So that didn't go well. But then the next year I ended up going to my first con, which was Furry Equinox in Toronto. And that was horrible.
No.
And I really I couldn't be on the floor space because there were so many suits and that kind of thing. It was just like, this is weird to me, too much. But I stuck with it. Like my husband, David, was super into it at the time. And a lot of my close friends were into it at the time. And so I just stuck with being in the fandom. I ended up creating a character that I really connected with. And from there, I started to go to FE more frequently. I got a good group of people. And I think that's what helped me was I found going to cons with a nice, good group of friends, really helped me enjoy the time more. And so I started to integrate more into the fandom that way. And then I went to my first dance competition and I was like, okay, now I can see why fursuiting is really cool. That was wicked.
Yeah, I always love watching those competitions.
Right? It's just it's an enjoyment on a different level. It's just I never really enjoyed dancing before I got my fursuit. And it was just it's so freeing and it's so amazing what people can do in them. And it's I think it was the mix of that and then creating a character that I really connected with and that I was able to express myself with, connected me more to the fandom. And then I went down the rabbit hole of being okay, I need a fursuit really, really bad. And just work towards that. And then I got my fursuit 2 years ago, which is when you joined the fandom. And that's when I kind of really got into it. I started to go to cons more. This past year, we started our own fur meet for a little bit locally too. And I think that's what it was that really connected me to the fandom.
And I think what's great about your story is it shows to all those people that are intimidated at meets or cons that it may be rough at first, but if you persist, it's going to end up being something worthwhile. Because I encounter a lot of people at our meets or just in the Telegram chats who say they go to a meet and they're just overwhelmed because there's so many people, or, there appears to be cliques. Whether or not there are actually cliques or not, completely depends on the meet, obviously. It may be perceived cliques or it could be real. But I see a lot of people, I wouldn't say it's every meet I see someone commenting on that, but I know it is quite common, even on Twitter and other platforms that furries are on, that they feel intimidated going to their first meets, and sometimes it can off-put them from the fandom. But I think that's really neat that you just mentioned how you felt that same way, but after a while and once you started building up your own friend group, it's become something really awesome.
Yeah, no. And I mean, I think that's the thing is even if the group stuff is difficult, there's so many amazing people in the fandom. I mean, it's just anywhere. You're going to get the awesome people and they're not so awesome, but there is going to be great people. You make great friends. There's a lot of that common interest and connection with people. And there's so much diversity of people that you just can find a lot of things to connect over. And then once you get that friend base, you get more comfortable, going to those kind of things and stuff. And it just opens up a whole new world. It makes you a stronger person, I find. If it wasn't for the furry fandom, I wouldn't be as confident and I wouldn't be able to do not even just the furry stuff, but the conferences and that kind of thing that I do, scientific conferences. I present and I lecture all the time in front of people now. And furry really helped me do that.
Yeah, I would say that I am very much the same. I mean, I've always considered myself a pretty good public speaker. It's never like intimidated me too much, but there's some certain aspects of like putting yourself out there in front of people that I've always been nervous about. One of those being dancing. And I'm not talking about dance comps because I still haven't participated in a dance competition at a FurCon. Though I say that, I've actually entered into the Fiesta dance comp coming up at the end of March. So,
oh man,
we'll see if I follow through or not. Maybe this will be the encouragement I need. But I mean, I didn't even feel comfortable dancing like as an individual with like a partner or like a group of friends.
Yeah.
Like I just feel so nervous, and like the same with drinking with friends. Like I've never been a big drinker. I don't particularly enjoy it too much. It's not something I seek out, but I definitely didn't enjoy like even having like one drink prior to joining the fandom. And I'm not saying, oh, the fandom made me an alcoholic. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is it's definitely let me feel like let loose, basically.
Yeah,
I've always been really stressed and anxious. And I think being in the fandom has allowed me to unlock parts of my personality that I didn't used to know exist or didn't feel comfortable letting exist, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that too.
Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, I kind of talked about my origin story being based around Rocket Raccoon. Around that same time that I was getting the Rocket Raccoon fursuit, I was actually posting in a Facebook group called Zoo Creepers. Instead of Zookeepers, it's Zoo Creepers, which is like a professional group of about 14,000 zookeepers from around the world. Not just zookeepers, it's like zoo professionals. So there's like managers in there, curators, but a lot of zookeepers. And I was posting in there talking about like cosplay. And I was like, well, I don't want to drown out. I don't want to spam this group talking about cosplay when it's not really related to our profession. So I made a comment that it would be cool if we could start a cosplay group that was just for zookeepers, like those of us in our profession, that we could be together in one group and be nerdy in. So I made it, and quite a few people joined. I mean, not like too much, maybe like 15 people, but it was better than I expected. And we made a thread where we all introduced ourselves. And this one person posted, and they mentioned their name, and they said, I'm part of a mascot group, and we go mascotting at charity events and conventions.
Yeah.
It wasn't exactly worded like that, but the word they used was mascot over and over again. And I looked at the photo, and remember, this is around the time where I'm Googling everything. And so I was already somewhat familiar with the fandom, and they posted that photo, and it was a group of fursuiters. Yeah. And I'm like, those aren't mascots. I'm like, those aren't mascots. You ain't fibbing anybody. Like,
yeah.
know you. And so I started talking to that person and, even mentioned to them that I'm starting to explore the fandom, and it's really encouraging to see somebody else in the profession that's into this. We started talking. And I actually just met them for the first time in person at MFF. And that person was Mamau, or Cooper Tom's girlfriend. So she is in the same profession and career field as me. And it's so funny how that worked out. We even just recently, like about a month ago, we started a Telegram chat for zookeepers that are furries. It's called Zoo Creepers Furry Edition is what the Telegram chat's called. And we don't just talk about furry things in there, and we don't also just focus on animal care. It's a nice mixture of both. It's like a nice chat showcasing everything that we are. And I think that circles back to when we were talking about how the fandom allows us to be who we are. It's been so awesome to meet people in my own field of work who are also furries, because I think it makes me, and everybody that knows me knows I say this all the time, but I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of being in the fandom. I think it's completely normal as anything else that humans do in their everyday life. And meeting other people that are in my profession, it allows me to see how true that really is. I think it's true, but seeing other people who think the same, it just makes me feel better. Makes me feel better about it.
I've also found that the fandom's like that neat intersection between fandom and like the people and profession. It has allowed me to like interact with different professionals I would never have, and like do even some collaborations with those professionals. So a few years ago at it's like the Barcode or Biodiversity conference that I attended, there was a furry that was coming from Germany, and he was asking me if I could show him around the city while he was down, and if like I could show him around the local furry community. And then we hung out a bunch, like at the conference itself and stuff. And we even like collaborated on a few projects in terms of like research and that kind of thing. And I mean, I wouldn't have never connected with this person if there wasn't that commonality of the fandom in there. So it's just like, it's neat that you can make those kind of connections across the planet with the furry fandom.
Exactly. And I think that circles to the topic of like misconceptions about the fandom, because, you know, I don't want to spend too much time on this, because we all know there's so many documentaries out about it and they all say the same thing and hammer it into your brain. And so even people outside of the fandom have heard some of this before, but I think it's still important to repeat it. And that's just that the fandom, as I said earlier, it's no different than any other fandom out there. And it's not any stranger or different than anything else people do in their day-to-day lives. I mean, the vast majority, I don't know what the percentage is, but I would say the vast majority of furries don't actually think that we are our animals. It's just a fun representation of ourselves. I don't think I'm a tiger, but I very much enjoy putting on a costume and entering that headspace of just not really caring about what I look like, not worried about my body, and being able to be something different for a little bit. It's relaxing. I mean, despite how sweaty I get and how hot I get and how thirsty I get, it is definitely, despite all that, incredibly relaxing to be able to do that, I think.
Yeah. And I think that's the same for me. The fandom was a crux for me in a lot of different ways. Like, it was a good way of gaining my confidence, but it was also like a way to explore myself and my sexuality and my identity kind of thing too. And I think like just having that opportunity to explore yourself and that kind of thing is very important. And it's something that everybody needs and does, and people do it in different ways. And this is just one of the ways that we like to do it. We like to pretend we're an animal for a little bit just because we have a fun time being fuzzy.
Exactly. And I mean, obviously the fandom isn't just about fursuits. There's a very incredibly small percentage of the fandom that actually has fursuits. So in the grand scheme of things, we're actually kind of in the minority of people that have these. But the thing is, fursuits, honestly, they're no different than any other cosplay. It just happens to be that in this fandom, most of the time, our costumes are animal related. I say most of the time because they're not always based on true to life animals, and they're not always fuzzy things. Obviously, there are some bug suitors or alien creatures that are out there, even mythological creatures. But what I always mention to people, since I am also involved in the cosplay world, is no different than somebody that dresses up as Spider-Man. That person doesn't believe they're Spider-Man. I mean, maybe there are some people that do. I don't know. Who am I to judge? But the vast majority of cosplayers don't believe they are those characters, but they still enjoy entering that headspace and being able to relax and like tune out.
Yeah. And I think that's like, it's a neat intersection with a lot of different fandoms. Like there's the anime and the cosplay and that kind of thing, or like the comic. But then there's also like sports fandoms, the people that dress up in the stands and paint their whole bodies a certain color to cheer on their team. Like, we're really no different than them. We're just cheering on ourselves.
Yeah. And I mean, and kind of going back to that, what we're celebrating and what we enjoy being a part of is those anthropomorphic animals. And I mean, when I grew up, since I'm older than most furries, and I'm not old, but I'm older, being 28. I was born in 1990, and I was a decent aged kid around the time Lion King was starting to become a big thing. And we had Lion King, we had the dinosaur movie We're Back, all these other like really classic cartoon creature films. And I remember as a child, I thought it was the coolest thing ever to like make a fake tail and like dance around to these songs as I'm watching the movie.
Yeah.
And I think like as an adult, it's not that I haven't grown up. I very much have. But being able to hone in on those interests that I had as a kid and being able to be silly for a little bit, it's a stress relief, you know. Like, we have to be serious so often as adults, or even scientists, especially in how greatly changing our world is, and conservation issues and such that we face. It's very stressful. It's a very serious time as adults, serious adult time. And being able to be a furry and put on that suit for a little bit, it's such an amazing stress relief. And it allows you to remember the good old days where you could eat some tater tots and chicken nuggets and put on a fake dinosaur tail and dance around to cartoons for a little bit. And that was your world. That's all it was.
Yeah. And I find with me and suiting especially, it kind of also breaches those worlds a little bit. Like I've done a little bit of suiting with at the Insectarium in Montreal, and like getting to talk to kids about the insect diversity and that they're seeing at the Insectarium, while also being this cute fuzzy creature that they can get pictures with and stuff, is like, that's really cool too. And it like helps to join those two worlds of the science and the furry.
Definitely. And that's something that I have found in not just my YouTube videos, but when I go out and suit in public areas, I see it as just a very unique way of doing science communication, or what we say in the biz, SciComm. It's such a great way of connecting with people, because people are going to listen. They listen to me as human me, as I say. They listen to me. I've done a lot of public speaking events, but people pay attention more to me when I have that fuzzy green costume on than any other time, because it's eye-catching and it's different. And it also, I think, allows me to reach children a bit better, because I've never been someone that's geared towards teaching younger crowds. I've always been like teenagers and up. I mean, I've taught college classes. I've spoken to like adult age groups at conferences, but I've never taught like children.
Right.
I'm okay at it. I'm not wonderful. But if I put on that costume, it allows me to reach them. And of course, when it comes to teaching people to care about the animals we study in a way that's going to help preserve these animals, kids are our best audience for that, because they're the ones that ultimately are going to make sure these animals survive into the future. And if the way to reach them is to dress up as a fuzzy animal creature and talk science, then I am going to do that every day if I can.
Yeah,
exactly. But I just think, the biggest thing that brings this misconception discussion home is that this fandom is just no different than anything else, any other fandom. I think people see the fursuits or they see the art and they think, wow, that's strange. But just like you said, I mean, to someone that's not a sports fan, some of the sports fans' rituals look a little weird.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's completely normalized. And then furries were from all walks of life, just like the Phyla that we were talking about earlier. We come from different backgrounds. We have different professions. There's a lot of professionals in the fandom, from medical doctors to lawyers.
Yeah.
Woozy comes to mind. There's so many of us. And I think a lot of people, I don't want to say the F word, but I'm going to say it. I think a lot of people think furries are these freaks that don't do anything. They just enjoy, in their minds, strange art and strange costumes, and they're just weirdos. But I think if people actually met furries and got to talking to them, they'd realize, oh my gosh, this person actually probably works in my office, or, this person works at the university that I happen to go to as a student. We're everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, we're no different. And I hope that by doing this podcast together, we're not only introducing people to awesome, cool animals that they should work to preserve for future generations, but also introducing them to these fandoms that, they may not know too much about, but basically trying to get rid of these preconceived notions about us,
Yeah.
and trying to clarify what we actually
I think we're in a good position to do that. Like, as we're kind of two professionals that people think of in high regard when they think of like academia and university and that kind of thing. But we're also like in this kind of quote unquote strange hobby, which like I think will connect with a lot of people here.
Exactly. And I think what's going to be neat is as we start to do future podcast episodes, obviously this episode's a little bit different because I think our focus here was just to introduce ourselves because some of our listeners know us, but a lot probably don't. So This episode's pretty different than what we plan on doing. But as we progress through this podcast and make new episodes, I think bringing in guests from like the science world and the furry world, kind of alternating maybe even between the two, and maybe even bringing people from other fandoms like the anime world and the cosplay world. Hopefully by bringing in those people, it introduces our listeners to people that have had experiences like us, that have had these fandoms provide, such a positive influence on their lives. And maybe that will help clear up the air, basically.
Yeah, we'll get their opinions on both of them. And I mean, I'm sure down the line we'll probably get a few people that will recruit to the furry side.
I hope so. Joseph, if he's listening, Joseph from Nerd Sloth, this is your year to find your animal. We're going to make it happen sooner rather than later. Maybe we can get them all to come to Fiesta at the end of March.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Right. And of course, I mean, I don't think either of us want this podcast to just become science and statements about the fandom. We got to have some fun too. And I think one of the funnest things that we could do is introducing them to the various different animals that we share our planet with in a very creative way, which is just listening to their voices and having them guess what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, bugs make some pretty strange noises too, right? They're not all just crickets. They don't make cricket noises.
I heard one yesterday in a documentary that kind of sounded like a trumpet.
What?
Maybe that'll pop up.
Oh, yeah, maybe. Hint, hint. Remember this comment because it may show up later.
Yeah.
So we were thinking that these weekly trivia questions, we're trying to be quirky with it, and we would call these trivia questions segment Guess Who, and not spelled with a W, but spelled with an H, like the who that an owl makes, because we're full of puns in the furry fandom, so why not extend it to the podcast?
Yeah.
So these weekly trivia questions, otherwise known as #Guess Who, is going to be where we play an animal vocalization and our listeners have to guess the species. So basically, we would play one of these vocalizations, and then you guys have, from the airing of that podcast to the next one, to send in your guesses to our email, which is phylaandfandom@gmail.com. You can send your guesses there. We are going to see if people can get it down to the species. The first person to actually get the file to a species will get a shout out in our next podcast. I almost said video because I'm thinking YouTube.
Yeah.
This is not YouTube. This is podcast world. So the first person to get to the correct answer will be highlighted in our upcoming podcast. And of course, if no one guesses it, we'd give the shout out to the person that gets the closest to it. So we'll try and not make these too difficult.
Yep. And we're planning on having Phyla and Fandom, the title of the podcast, as our kind of go-to for all social media. So we'll be on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and maybe YouTube.
Maybe.
And all places you'll find podcasts.
Yeah, you will find us if you search Phyla and Fandom. We will be easy to find.
Yeah.
Which, obviously, that leads us to our first Guess Who. So we're going to play this vocalization and have a listen and see if you can immediately think of who it belongs to. So that was our first Guess Who. You guys have a week to get your responses in. It's okay if you don't know the answer right now. Just have a few more listens, see if you can get to it, and try to get to species without cheating. We want to see what you guys know about the animal world without the influence of Google. Try your best to resist that Google search. Once again, you can send your guesses or answers, whichever you want to call it, to our email at phylaandfandom@gmail.com. And as we were mentioning earlier, we're going to try and make our very easy to find on the internet. You can find us on Patreon at Phyla and Fandom. All you got to do is search that name. You can also find us on Twitter under the same name. Another place to find us is by following Nerd Sloth, our network host on Twitter. You can also check them out on their website with nerdsloth.com. They also have a wide range of different podcasts. My personal favorite, speaking of all the fun animal cartoons I used to watch, my personal favorite with Nerd Sloth is their Saturday morning cartoon show, where they talk about Saturday morning cartoons, as the name implies. Very straightforward.
Or you can check out Know the Lore Overwatch. That's my favorite right now. I'm playing a lot of Overwatch, and it's another great podcast on their network.
Awesome. So another nerdy thing to visit on Nerd Sloth. Who would have guessed that there was nerdy things on a website that has nerd in its name? Who would have thunk? So obviously this has been our first episode of Phyla and Fandom. Feel free to leave us a feedback on any of the platforms you can find us, and we hope to come back to you guys soon with episode 2.